Role orientations, what these are. Different orientations towards a role can also exist. Now, the college student has broad outlines, such as enrolling, going to class, studying, taking exams, but their different students might emphasize different features of the student role. To some people, being a student doesn't really mean that they have to be, a straight A-grade student. No. For some people, being a student means, being active in extracurricular activities. This is the main purpose why they are studying in the university. So you see, these role orientations are different, according to different people. One reason why some people become academics, professors, is because they like teaching. They like working with the bright-minded students. They like, disseminating knowledge and so on and so forth. But to others, being a professor actually means doing research. They care less about teaching. They care more about research. So you see, this is another example of what the role orientation actually are. Now, the next thing you need to understand is the distinction made between dyads and the triads. When two people engage in interaction, it's called as a dyad, because there are two people talking, right? Two people interacting. It's a dyad. When a third person is introduced into this interaction, it's becoming a triad. Now, interaction between three people talking at the same time is much more complex, because, three people have to be sending messages, they have to be processing these messages, they have to be reacting, they have to be doing the facial work, they have to be doing the impression management. So there are a bunch of things going on in the triads. While both dyads and triads involve interaction, and both can be seen as groups, there are some interesting differences between two-person and three-person interaction. From a sociological and practical point of view, the triad is a much more complicated social arrangement for the reasons which I have already authored. Now that's all about the social structures. We talked about the differences between the triads and the dyads. We also talked about role making, role orientation, statuses and roles. The last thing for this week is the social institutions. Now, in the beginning of this class, I mentioned what the social structure is, and the social institution, I approximated that to the tree. Okay, a tree in a forest. It's a standalone tree with social structure connecting the tree and the leaves on the branches. So an institution then is a set of groups and organizations with whole norms and values that center around the most basic needs of the society. Some examples of social institutions are the family, the education, economy, government, healthcare, the polity, the police, right? These are examples of social institutions. Within these institutions, you have social structures. For example, within the social institution of education, there is a social structure which is explaining interaction between the professors and the students. There is a pattern of interaction between, let's say, the students of the private universities with the professors of these private universities, and the pattern of interaction between the professors and the students of state universities. Right? You may think of any other example that is related to the social structures in the Institute of Education. Now, all of these institutions are found in one form or another in all societies because they carry out the necessary societal tasks. So these institutions, which I described earlier, they appear in every single society because these institutions fulfill society's basic needs, which is, healthcare, education, safety, security, running the government, running the economy, right? These are indispensable parts of society's basic functions. Descriptions of the major institutions help to define the nature of society. So if you are studying, let's say, India, or you're studying some, Chinese phenomena, first thing you need to do is you need to familiarize yourself with the institutions which are related to the subject of your research. Okay, without familiarizing yourself with the history of evolution of that institution, without familiarizing yourself with all sorts of norms and values, the social structures found in that institution, you risk producing very unreliable and very invalid results. This is the reason why it's so important to spend some time in the country which you are studying. All right, so next thing we need to discuss today is the society. I guess that all of you have some, basic understanding of what the society is. Society is the bunch of people, a group of people, they have some probably common language, or there may be different groups of people constituting one society with different languages. Societies usually have their own unique, cultures, histories. They have one common view of the future, right? So this is what we've been taught in the schools, or, this is what we've been taught by our parents, by mass media, and so on and so forth. Sociologists define society as a population living in a given territory with a social structure and sharing a culture. Societies are commonly described in terms of their economic system, but not only the economic system. Obviously, there is also a whole set of cultural symbols, a whole set of historical legacies out there, which all, combined make up that society's, whole and the nature of that society. There are different types of societies. In your textbook, probably you've read about the hunting and the gathering societies, the most primitive societies. Next, we have the horticultural societies. It's one level above. The hunting and the gathering societies, it's much more advanced, obviously. Next stage of development comes around, it is the agrarian society. This is where people started to grow crops, to collect the crops, to produce bread, this sort of stuff. Industrial societies, these societies have emerged in the 19th and 18th centuries, Europe. Right, these societies are characterized by industrial development, scientific discoveries, and these societies obviously are much more complicated than the very, primitive, hunting or gathering societies. And the last stage, the last type of the society is the post-industrial or post-materialist society. Now, many people believe that right now in the 21st century, the Western world has entered the age of post-industrialism, age of post-materialism, which basically means that in these societies, less emphasis is placed on industrial development, more emphasis is placed on, post-materialist development, like thinking about the animal rights, thinking about the environment, sustainable development, thinking about protecting the mother planet Earth, and so on and so forth. These values are usually not found in extremely industrial or agrarian societies. What people think about, what people care about in these types of societies is how to survive, how to mend, how to make sure that, how to meet, their ends, right? How to make sure that they have something to eat, how to make sure that the country is developed, how to make sure that their children are safe and secure in future, right? These are the questions that usually bother people who live in industrial and agricultural agrarian societies. The classic sociological way of describing societies in terms of the social relationships that predominate was provided by the German sociologist Tönnies, who suggested that the relationship between people are different in modern societies than in the societies of the past. So obviously, I think you can agree with me that in the modern day, in the modern times, people communicate, interact with each other much less than they used to some hundreds and hundreds years ago, right? Societies were not as complicated, as complex, as divided as they are right now. In the primitive societies, there were only some like 10 or 20 occupations, that's all. Like peasants, nobility, some tax collectors, soldiers, doctors probably, some scholars, and, the emperors, the kings and queens, that's all. But nowadays, the labor is so divided. Now, remember what Emil Durkheim was talking about, when he wrote about division of labor. Now, modern-day societies are so divided, they're so complex, that there is a much more social interaction, social pattern of interaction that that appeared, and these things used to be absent some several centuries ago. Societies can be divided into two types: the Gemeinschaft and the Gesellschaft, according to Tönnies. The Gemeinschaft, the historical, the old, the very, the old type of societies. They are characterized by very personal, face-to-face relationships such as those that exist in families, in rural villages, and perhaps in small towns. I don't remember I mentioned this in the class, but if you read the chapter, you should be familiar with Emil Durkheim's distinction of the mechanic solidarity and the organic solidarity. So pre-modern societies, they were organic. Okay, people knew each other really well. They had some, face-to-face interaction. People's behavior was usually dictated by some norms, by moral persuasion. People acted the way they did because they were afraid of punishment that they would receive from supernatural forces, or people were acting because they were persuaded to act this way by their relatives, by the country's leaders, and so on and so forth. So society was really organic. People were really close to each other. All right, this was the case. This was the characteristic of Gemeinschaft societies. However, Gesellschaft societies, these are the modern type of societies, they are characterized by the relationships that are impersonal and distant. This is exactly how Emil Durkheim characterized the societies that he called as mechanic solidarity societies. People are not really connected to each other, through some, moral persuasion, through some norms and values. The way that people are connected to each other is through the rules, through the laws which govern the lives of the people. Some laws state that the police should treat well the citizens, right? And the police has to treat people well because he's there to protect the people. But he's not treating people well because he thinks that people should be treated well, but because there is a law which really, forces and, makes this police officer treat people well. You see, people's actions, people's behavior is dictated, it is determined by this set of rules and, rules and norms of conduct. People interact with each other only in very limited ways. And I think that the more society develops, the less connected people would be. Just look at what's going on nowadays in the global society, right? In the international society. We see how heavily people rely on the social media, how heavily people are addicted to the internet, to social networks. Even today we can observe that youngsters communicate less with each other, in real life. There is more communication going on in the virtual space, on internet and in social networks. So in one respect, Tony was right, that modern day societies, they would become more and more complex, much more complicated in a way that there would be more mechanic solidarity instead of, some very organic, very bonded and close interaction between the people. Well, this is where I'm going to stop for this week. Now, as usual, if you've missed something, you're welcome to watch this video once again or read the chapter. If nothing helps, you're always welcome to send me an email. Well, have a good day and see you in the class. Bye now.